Well, that's a slightly difficult question, I suppose. It's not as easy as you'd imagine. I suppose your favorite implies some sort of admiration for that person. So that would discount two of the historical characters that I certainly find most fascinating, which would be Hitler and Stalin. That's certainly where my sort of professional interest lies, in those two people. And if I was to, go back in a time machine and spend time observing a historical character, it would, I think, the most interesting experience would be to go and observe those two. But I certainly wouldn't say they were my favourites because, as I said, that implies some sort of admiration. Um, I suppose Churchill comes close, of the same mould. You know, he's certainly someone that I have a lot of admiration for, and someone remarkably who, for most of his life, was kind of essentially a failure, even, I mean, by his own standards, certainly. And then remarkably, comparatively late in life, he becomes the sort of, to a large extent, Britain's saviour. I appreciate he's not seen in the same positive light by the Poles completely. But certainly he is seen as Britain's saviour. He's someone I certainly have a lot of admiration for as a historical character. But I do like these sort of individuals who are sort of, rather larger than life. And one that I certainly, he featured in my last book, in the book First to Fight. So he was the British military attaché in Poland in 1939. He was called Colonel Adrian Carton de Villar. Had a Belgian name, but he was born in Belgium, raised in Britain, and was an absolutely remarkable man. He had a very long and illustrious military career behind him, even long before 1939. He'd lost an eye and lost a hand. The hand had been lost in the First World War. The eye had been lost in Africa in I think the 1890s. So he was sort of maimed and looked every inch the sort of warrior of old. And he was someone who'd been, I think, wounded, I think from memory, 9 times in the First World War, and came out of the First World War saying he thought it was wonderful fun, which is just the most bizarre attitude you can imagine. So he's absolutely larger than life character, and then ends up in Poland as the military attaché. He actually went native. He had a country estate in Polessia in eastern Poland in 1939. So he was a great sort of British Polonophile. And he's just a really big character in history. And it's people like that, I think, that make history very interesting, because they are really larger than life. So I'd probably go for him, Adrian Carton de Villar. I usually have a couple of books on the go. So one on my desk and one by the bed and so on, and usually at least 2. I started when we're still in the middle of this coronavirus lockdown. So I started not long ago reading Albert Camus' The Plague, which seemed an appropriate novel to read in the circumstances. And that's been, I wouldn't say sending me to sleep. It's been more like keeping me awake, because there are so many parallels to what we're going through at the moment. So that's been an interesting read as a novel over the last few weeks. And then a sort of history-related read that I've been going through at the moment is Saul Davies' recent book, which is called Crucible of Hell, which is about the Okinawa campaign in the Pacific War of 1945. Saul's a great mate, and I've read a lot of his work, and he's a fantastic historian, and it's a really, really brilliant piece of work as well. So I do recommend that, Crucible of Hell. That's what I've been working through, as well as Albert Camus. I'm just preparing at the moment a proposal which is going to go out fairly soon, a publishing proposal for a book on the Ładoś group, which is not very well known. It certainly was almost completely unknown up until a couple of years ago. The Ładoś group is very interesting because it was a group of Polish diplomats and Jewish activists in Switzerland during World War II, between 1940 and 43, roughly, who were forging Latin American passports that they then smuggled back into occupied Europe, primarily into Poland, to try and assist Jews escaping the Holocaust, effectively. And it's a massive operation. It certainly dwarfs anything that Oskar Schindler was doing at the time and that sort of thing. So they reckon up to about 10,000 people received these Ładoś passports, and it's a fascinating story. So I'm researching that. As I said, the proposal is going in imminently, and that will be my next project and my next book. So it's a really interesting story. So look out for that one. Interesting question. I think you need to have enough, obviously, research at the beginning of the project and have enough of a handle on the material that's available and what's been written about the subject before. And then, I mean, some people I know have a sort of different modus operandi where they look at or do all of the research up front and then do all the writing in one sort of almost in one sitting. I don't do that. There's a preliminary stage of research, and then as I write, I do the necessary research for that chapter or for that section, which is just what works for me. So that will mean lots of archival work. It will mean lots of visits to the British Library and other libraries, other archives. But I sort of do it as I go along, if that makes sense, and then hopefully it all comes together in the end. So it's a sort of, the writing and the research is not two separate processes and two separate periods for me. It's all intertwined. So many, I would say. The first one to sort of mention, I suppose, has to be Norman Davies, who I have worked with for a long time. I had a very fruitful professional relationship with for a long time. I was a student of Norman's way back in the early 1990s in London University, and I started working with him as a research assistant. And we co-authored together. We wrote a history of the city of Wrocław together, which came out in 2002. So that relationship with Norman has been a tremendous apprenticeship, really, to how to be a historian, how to write, all of those things, which tragically, I mean, most historians don't ever get sort of taught. You either can write or you can't. But for Norman, it was working with Norman was a tremendous lesson in every way of historianship and authorship and everything else. So he's certainly top of the list in terms of influences. I think another one would probably be Anthony Beevor, great sort of British military historian. Less so a sort of direct influence, but more in terms of, I think, his significance to all people who write, certainly popular history in Britain, is immense, because he really was very influential in sort of propagating the idea that history could be of interest to ordinary people, could break out of its academic ivory towers, and could actually be a sort of a coffee table book that anyone could pick up and buy. And we have enjoyed for a couple of decades, really, a history boom in this country. It is coming to an end now, unfortunately. Hopefully it will struggle on for a bit longer. We have enjoyed a great tradition of popular history writing. And a lot of that, I think, that history boom and that rich tradition, which obviously predates Beevor, but I think Beevor is very instrumental in that, and I think I would like to cite him as an important influence as well. And the last one I would probably mention, that sort of the first book that I really sort of devoured and just found fascinating, going way back, was actually the biography of Adolf Hitler, which was done by Alan Bullock, which came out originally in the 1950s. It's called A Study in Tyranny, and it was beautifully written. It always sticks in my mind because it was so beautifully written, very kind of almost lyrical the way it was written, and obviously historically very strong and on all sort of sourced. And given he was writing in the 1950s, he still had access to a lot of Hitler's contemporaries who are still around then, and so on. So that is certainly a book that sticks in my mind as one of those in my formative years that sort of opened my eyes to the fascination with history.